Hello and welcome back to A Fall from Grace. We'll be continuing where we left off, which, if you recall, is after the whole gang decided to scope out the town where they're going to be doing like their little heist, where the ball is going to be at. I believe that they all have their masks ready, and Cedric, I believe that, which is a main character, which is a coyote, has integrated well into the group. He is now a more seasoned thief, I guess. Everyone seems to like him more or less, and his relationship with Victor has improved. What else? Lysander is still looking for him, and it seems that Lysander more or less knows what's going on, at least in so that he is going to be attending the same ball that they are going to be attending. And he ordered himself his own little special mask, which you saw in the last scene of the previous update. You don't actually get to see the mask, I think, but like you get to see that he received it and he's like, oh yeah, perfect. A mask. There's probably some symbolism there, but like, yeah. And I refer to the fact that he is of the same persuasion as Victor and Cedric. He just doesn't like to admit it. What else? Pretty much the whole gang is gearing up to go to the ball, and I believe that this update is basically them finally getting ready and just like making their way there, I think. Not really sure. But yeah. Anyways, so we're probably not going to see the confrontation where Lysander shows up, but we are going to see them basically making their way there now, I think. Anyways, so without further ado, let us continue A Fall from Grace. Cedric shivered as the cold water wrapped itself around his fingers. He'd taken off his gloves and his hat, laying them on the damp ground to his left, and was now sitting on the side of the stream closest to the bandits' camp. He undid his ponytail and slowly ran his left hand, which he hadn't dipped into the water yet, through his hair. To his relief, it didn't feel greasy, but he knew that if he didn't wash it before going to bed, he would strongly regret it the following morning. Part of him wished that he could just take his boots, pantaloons, and the rest of his clothes off and dive into the running water. But the summer days were over, and bathing in the stream was no longer an option during the colder months of the year, and yet the coyote still felt drawn to hit this or any watercourse whenever he needed to clear his mind or just relax after a long day. It was an aspect of who he was that had remained unvaried since he was a child. At his parents' estate, he'd spent entire afternoons sitting next to the lake and listening to the water, or bathing and playing games with Victor whenever the fox wasn't busy. During his days as a guest at Lysander's aunt's house, he'd missed that garden and the lake in particular. He would sometimes take walks around his hometown, always making sure to stroll along the riverbank just outside the walls to make up for it. He had always loved the feeling of being immersed in nature, and there had certainly been no lack of that feeling ever since he'd started living with Victor and the bandits. Getting lost in his own thoughts felt easier than usual on a morning like this, with the much-anticipated masked ball looming just over a day away. He recalled just how different his life had been on this same day the previous year. The same Victor, who was now a part of his everyday life, was then just a warm, hazy childhood memory, part of a world that he wished that he could return to, especially during the rainy days that he'd spend alone in his room, whilst Lysander was out visiting his many family members. Morning. Victor had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and was standing just a few inches to Cedric's right. Oh, hello, V. Where did you come from? Just further down that way. I was taking a short walk and spotted you sitting here. Is everything all right? I know what that look on your face usually means. I'm fine, thanks. Cedric smiled. The fact that he could tell the fox cared so much about him filled him with gratitude. Thank goodness that they never got tired of spending time with each other. Thank goodness that he'd made the right choice. That worrying thought had still lodged in the depths of his mind since the start of their relationship, the fear that perhaps Once time had passed, and they had both gotten to know each other again, there just wouldn't be much left to talk about and things would quietly die down between them. Luckily, their bond was as strong as ever, despite their different backgrounds and despite the years spent apart, and at this point it seems that the topics of conversation were destined to never run out. I've been thinking, what if things don't go as planned? Tomorrow? No, not necessarily. I mean our plan, moving to the larger towns and starting things over. What if... What if that doesn't come to pass? Cedric looked the other way, aware that he was letting his intrusive thoughts take over at the wrong time. The fox smiled and sat down next to him. It's hard not to run the risk of overthinking on days like this, isn't it? Yeah. I have always been the boy who got lost in thoughts ever since I can remember. The answer is we'd have to remain bandits for another year or so. I know it's not what either of us would want in the long run, but you don't seem to mind this life too much, do you? Cedric shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips as he was reminded of the surprising joy that he'd gotten out of this lifestyle change. Though listen to me, love. I'll do everything that I can to make sure our plan works out, I promise. When I say that I'd like to start things over with you, I mean it. I never wanted you to be locked into banditry for life. It's true, this country doesn't like it when folks manage to crawl out of the place that they've been assigned in society. It's almost unthinkable for such a thing to happen. But fuck it, we'll do it at the expense of those who put us down in the first place. It was nigh impossible for Cedric not to smile at the fox's optimism. He admired his choice to stand up and change things for the better in a world marred by hatred and injustice. A rogue, a tail raiser, and a revolutionary, you're everything my parents taught me to be afraid of. And they were right to be afraid. Look at us now, confirmed sodomites living a life of crime. These words were accompanied by the fox leaning forward and running a hand down Cedric's chest, aiming for his crotch. The coyote shook his head. What a pathetic attempt at getting him hard. A pathetic attempt which worked instantly. Now, darling, don't get too excited. I can't possibly delay you so when Hollis is expecting you back at the camp. Oh? Does he need help with something? The fox lets out an amused snort. You literally agreed to help him prepare lunch for all of us earlier. Oh. Yes, I did. You really are the boy who still gets lost in thoughts. Victor shook his head playfully and rose to his feet as Cedric got ready to follow him, picking his gloves and hat up. Luckily, I have a handsome fox bandit to keep me on track. You're just saying that. Just a few minutes later, Cedric was busy helping Hollis carry the pots, pans, and food that they needed out from the tiger's carriage so that the two could begin their work. The coyote took care of chopping up some onions, carrots, and turnips on the biggest chopping board that he could find, whilst Hollis prepared part of the salted meat from the group's supplies. We make a good team, Cedric. Have I told you that? Only every single time that I help with the cooking. Well, it's true. Were I to reopen a tavern at some point, I'd be honored to have you as an assistant in the kitchen. Cedric smiled, not quite sure of how to respond to that offer. I found that I enjoy cooking, but I don't know if I enjoy it that much. I fucking hate chopping up onions, for instance. He grumbled and wiped his right eye with his sleeve. You have no idea what I had to put up with back in the day. People who just wouldn't listen to what I tell them to do. Or the few that would listen, but far too incompetently. I told one fellow to season a meal with paprika, and he put it on everything. From the roast chicken to the side salad to even the bread rolls, for fuck's sake. I simply cannot deal with uncooperative behavior. Preparing food for others is a team effort, and good communication is essential, on both sides. Oh, so you had assistants with you in the kitchen? How silly of me. I always just assumed that you did everything yourself. You flatter me, said. But I've only got 2 hands. Which you put to great use, that's for sure. Hollis picked up a knife, playfully pointing it in the coyote's direction. You're lucky that you're attractive. I'm done with the vegetables, by the way. Brilliant. Next thing you can do is pick up that pot over there, the one that I filled with water. Let it heat up over the fire and then chuck the carrots and turnips in once it starts boiling. Cedric did as he was told, then inched closer to Hollis to check if he needed any further assistance. I've never asked, but, how come you left the inn that you used to work at? You've always struck me as someone who's incredibly passionate about what they do. You're in the mood for a story, I see. The coyote answered with a sly grin. I have an hour or two to spare, is all. And you're a great narrator. You could describe paint drying and I'd still listen. The tiger waved his right hand dismissively, indicating the subject was no big deal. The Black Horse. That was its name. 'Twas a family business, as you know, but that all changed after my parents died. My brother and I grew distant until one night he moved out, leaving a note behind and nothing else. That's when I knew that I had no choice but to fend for myself. At first, it felt liberating in a way. I could hire who I wanted, manage my time off, give myself a larger share of our earnings. And I didn't have to spend most of my time hiding my sexuality. In just over a year, I managed to turn the Black Horse into a meeting point for the local queer folk, and I couldn't have been happier. Though, in hindsight, I might have been a tad too reckless back then. Oh, really? When I say that I've seen and done it all, I'm not joking. It felt good, compensating for the years that I spent hiding who I was. But fate had other plans for me. Most of the people that I hired turned out to be a big disappointment. You've gotten to know me well enough, said. I don't think that I'm someone who's hard to work with, and I always treat everyone with respect no matter who they are. Would you agree? Cedric nodded. Of course he agreed. It felt like he'd never met anyone as accepting as Hollis and the other bandits in his life. I lost my temper a lot more than I should have back then, until one day they all walked out on me, save for one. I wonder how Oliver is doing these days. He was a good lad, and stuck with me until the very end. I don't know who was responsible for it. My ex-staff, a disgruntled client, or someone maliciously hiding their sexuality by pointing the finger at others. But rumors began to circulate about the Black Horse, rumors that reached the local authorities. The guards never attempted a full-on raid of the place, but folks gradually felt less safe, and soon I didn't have enough money coming in to keep the business open. I had tears in my eyes the day that I shut that creaky old door for the last time, and said my goodbyes to Ollie. I had nowhere to go. My reputation in town had plummeted. The people that I'd once worked with wanted nothing to do with me, and my brother wouldn't take me in again if Satan himself forced him to. And this is where Dion comes into the story. He'd long been a patron at the Black Horse. Actually, despite not being close with him, I was well aware of what a larger-than-life character he was, and of the long list of boys that would always be running after him. Soon I turned to banditry, and after a couple of unsuccessful muggings, I was desperate. One evening I happened across Dion and attempted to pickpocket him. Fucking hell, I wish that I could have been around to have witnessed that. Hollis let out a hearty laugh. You would have witnessed me being shoved against the wall and almost choked at first. Though it didn't take him more than a few seconds to recognize me. We made peace and had a long and earnest chat about everything, and as a result he offered me a place at his side in exchange for some good food. It almost felt like the planets had aligned, that I was destined to meet him. I'm so glad you did. Despite running the risk of coming off as a little condescending, Cedric placed a hand on Hollis' shoulder. He wanted him to know how much he'd appreciated learning about the events that had led him to his current life. I didn't wish for you to relive any memories you've tried leaving behind. Deep down, he almost felt a little jealous at how the tiger had discovered and accepted his sexuality so easily compared to him. He shook his head. That fear of missing out was particularly stupid in this case, considering everything Hollis had gone through. It doesn't hurt as much when I tell the story nowadays. It feels a lot more distant in a way. It had its ups and downs, but I've led a good life so far. The tiger smiled, tilting his head to look at the pot Cedric had left on the fire earlier. Water's boiling. After having enjoyed a hearty meal and sending praise to Hollis and Cedric's cooking, the bandits had all regrouped in front of the old carriage. It was time for Cedric to stay true to the promise that he'd made and instruct everyone on how to be on their best behaviors the following evening. The sun was just beginning to set, and the sound of Hilford's bells could be heard ringing out in the distance, carried by the whistling wind. The sound reminded him of the bells at the old schoolhouse near his home. He'd always wanted to try going to school there, rather than being isolated from all the other kids his age, Victor being the exception. Hollis handed him a mug of cider, which he knew the coyote never refused. "Have this as encouragement," said. "You don't want a dry mouth while giving a talk." With a look of deep gratitude, Cedric humbly accepted the drink. "Gentlemen, your attention, please." The sudden clang of a ladle hitting one of the bartender's pots brought any ongoing conversation to a halt. Cedric cleared his throat. Victor, who was seated to his right, gave him a little light nudge with his left elbow as a form of playful encouragement. Where was he even supposed to begin? If he had been put in this situation a year before, panic would have taken over. But he wasn't going to let that happen now. He recalled how old Farley would start his lessons, trying to encourage some form of interaction from his younger pupils. "All right, boys. By show of hands, which of you have been to a masquerade ball before?" This method seemed to work. Dion, Ridley, and Selwyn lifted up their hands. "Great. My guess is that this was a public event as opposed to a private one." The three bandits nodded. "I don't know why you'd expect past me to have enough money for that, though Sel might have been able to." "You overestimate the amount of people that I used to know. I never got invited to anything." Considering how easy it was to sneak my way into one of those so-called private events, they might as well have been public. Trying to hold the reins of the conversation was proving to be harder than Cedric had expected. Now, these events are what one might refer to as a figurative lever of society. That sounds contagious. An apt remark, my dear. Anyone could be hiding under a disguise, from a prince to a plowman. A public masquerade ball is where the rigid rules of polite society go to die, where every person is at last completely equal. Cedric paused. Not to get too political, but that's a truly unnerving thought for the ruling class. Speaking of, do you remember hearing talk of protests against these events a couple of years ago? Dion crossed his arms, tilting his head and rolling his eyes. Aye, it was the latest moral panic conservatives have come up with at the time. What an absolute farce. Masquerade balls were accused of encouraging all sorts of degeneracy, immorality, effeminacy, sexual transgression, sodomy, adultery, and prostitution. The others were all laughing by the time Cedric reached the end of the list. Sounds like my idea of a good time. Are they really that intense? You have no idea, Vic. I used to be an innocent young lad before the masquerade balls turned me into a whore. Hollis cleared his throat, bringing everyone's attention back to the subject at hand. So what you're saying is we don't need to learn any stuffy rules after all? You rogues wish that it were that simple. We are dealing with a public event, yes, but one that's hosted by a rich family in an opulent manor house. Despite being guaranteed anonymity, it would be best for us to still be mindful of etiquette. Thus, if someone greets you, be sure to return their words with a bow. To demonstrate what he was talking about, the coyote performed an elegant bow in his lover's direction. I suggest you all practice this. The more graceful, the better. If you require adjustments to your bow, I'm more than happy to give finer tips. Though I have serious doubts that any of you will have more trouble bending at the waist. The bandits all wore their own variations of fake shock to this call-out. Naturally, the standard formal introductions aren't required, since anonymity is expected. The most common way that you'll greet someone and begin a conversation at a masquerade ball is by saying, "Do I know you?" A brief moment of silence followed. Cedric knew exactly what each of the others was thinking of saying next. How the fuck are you supposed to reply to that? It was a ridiculous greeting, he had to admit. However you like. Most people tend to keep things vague or drop a couple of hints about themselves. Others have fun getting into character and giving entirely made-up answers. There are no rules in this case, other than don't be a dick, I suppose. Though I've definitely met plenty of dicks at these events. Whore. I'm gonna flog you. Dion chuckled. Vic, behave yourself. As for the food, in private events like these, dinner is served in the dining room around midnight. However, since it Looks like the attendance tomorrow evening will be huge. I don't think food is going to be served at a specific time or in a specific room. Rather, we'll all almost certainly be offered some refreshments throughout the evenings. This part is crucial to remember. Do not, I repeat, do not carry food into the ballroom. Absolute rookie mistake. You'd instantly out yourself as a member of the lower classes. Make sure that you only eat in the dining room or in any room that you can see food displayed in. Is that clear? Each of the others gave a nod. What's likely to be served food-wise? I was just about to ask that myself. That tends to vary on a great deal, though usually we're talking cold food. Chicken, fowl, lamb, lobster, and eel are likely to be the main event. Bit of a tangent, but the lamb our household cook used to prepare for the big events was the most delicious thing 80-year-old me had ever tasted. Can confirm, I stole a piece of it every single time. Cedric spared a glance towards Selwyn, notebook open and jotting everything down. From the angle that he was standing, he was pretty sure that the cat had written and underlined, "Go for the lamb." Anyhow, later in the evening you might be offered some tarts or ices as a dessert. As for the drink, we're talking claret, port, Lisbon. Fucking hell, we are all in for a treat. Dion shot the tiger a slightly concerned, if not outright judgmental look. I know it's very tempting, but no getting pissed on the job, lads. Hollis crossed his arms. Of course not. I trust each of us knows how to be a responsible fellow. But if any of you find where they're keeping the liquor, steal a bottle or 12 for me. Oh, question. Will we all be wearing gloves? What the hell? Ridley sneered, having picked up on what was being hinted at. Certainly yes. Never be seen without gloves in the ballroom. That's how the saying goes. Ah, so if we took them off, would everyone in the room just evaporate? I fucking wish. Lastly, dancing. I trust each of us knows how to dance. A series of prolonged vowels, meaning more or less, were uttered in response. I'm not expecting anything particularly impressive. As long as you can keep up with a minuet or a polka, you're good to go. If anyone wants to practice some steps, I could borrow Hollis's lute and play something. That sounds delightful. I'll go fetch her for you. Once he was done tuning the instrument, Cedric began to pluck its strings, playing an old tune that he'd learned many years before. His technique was rusty to say the least, but he somehow made it through, and most importantly managed to keep a regular tempo for the others to practice their steps, 2 at a time. Dion and Victor went first. It only took them a minute or so before they've gotten confident in their movements. His lover's skillful and calculated steps were almost entrancing, seductively luring his gaze in and filling him with pride along the way. The fox had a tendency to scoff at pastimes like these, simply because he viewed them as belonging to the elite, but Cedric had always considered him a gifted dancer, and he knew that beneath the act, Victor enjoyed it as much as he did. He'd first taught him some steps during one of their long summer afternoons in their early adolescence. He could still vividly recall every detail. Holding his friend close, losing himself in his eyes as they moved as one in the dancing sunlight beneath that huge willow's shade. Back then, it was just a game like any other, yet now the memory was filled with a deeper meaning. What would young Cedric think if he knew what life had in store for them both? As much as he dreamed and talked about the future and beginning his new life anew, the allure of the past remained strong within his thoughts. What if he'd managed to change his father's mind? What if young Victor and his family had been able to keep living with them? The promise that he had once made of sharing his home with his best friend wouldn't just be a bunch of empty words. They could have both owned the place, lived a life of luxury and ease together. No. What a load of nonsense. He hadn't missed out on making the most important choice of his life when the opportunity had presented itself. He'd chosen to follow Victor into the unknown. That's what mattered. He'd gotten to know the man that he loved and had built a strong and healthy relationship with him. He'd met the people that he was now honored to call his friends and comrades. He'd chosen community over isolation. And he'd matured in the past 9 months, exceeding even his wildest expectations. The only reason for this sudden wave of self-doubt came from that ever-looming masquerade ball. It felt like the 2 separate lives had been living as a nobleman and a bandit were colliding, and it wasn't pleasant. So many doubts and fears that he thought that he'd left behind were resurfacing, their roots sinking into his flesh, keeping him anchored to the ground, reminding him of all the bad choices that he'd made. Part of him wanted to burn that whole building to the ground. But for the time being, and for his sanity's sake, he just had to keep telling himself that it would all go smoothly and according to plan. That it was no big deal. He said. Cedric turned his attention to his lover, still idly playing as he was lost in his thoughts the past few minutes. Yes, my love? Can, we stop dancing now? Soon the bandits had finished practicing their dances and bows, and were told to make their way to Ridley's tent one at a time so that each of them could try on their costumes Cedric had purchased in town the day before. As for the coyote, he made himself comfortable on some large rocks a couple of feet away with the chess set that he had picked up from Dion's tent at his lap. Victor had been more than happy to join. This wasn't a serious match since neither of them had played the game in absolute ages. Their attempts at remembering the rules as they went led to a series of humorous mistakes, which only made things more entertaining. There was no pressure. They knew that they have time for longer and better thought out games in the future. Victor still carried a decent amount of guilt for having lost the white knight piece that he'd been gifted at the start of their journey, despite Cedric's reassurance that it was really not a big deal the moment that he'd brought it up again. It wasn't even mine to begin with. I nicked it from Lysander's place. That only made it more special. It symbolized you giving him the middle finger that he deserved. I must have lost it during the first robbery of ours. That's the only explanation that I can think of. I noticed that I couldn't find it when spending our first night at the old camp. I'll think of a good replacement for it, I promise. There's no need to, my love. But I'd like to all the same. You told me that you would love to have something of mine to hold on to. I haven't forgotten that. Cedric! Hollis had emerged from Ridley's tent, followed by the bear. Stop fucking Vic and get over here. You're up next. Upon entering, Cedric could already see his costume lying on the bed, a richly decorated shirt, a pair of hose, boots, and gloves, a fancy-looking feathered hat, and most importantly of all, a mask with canine features, all of them a vibrant shade of green. Each of these was almost completely monochrome, had it not been for some subtle pink and gold patterns and designs, which gave the whole costume an air of great elegance. Can I offer you something? I have some tobacco to chew on if you'd like. I'm fine, thanks. Maybe after dinner. The bear sank into his chair and crossed his legs. I bet it feels strange getting ready for a ball after all this time. Cedric grinned as he began to unbutton his waistcoat, not without a hint of melancholy. Yes, I suppose it does. I was never as nervous about attending one as I am now, that's for sure. He bent forward to pick up the mask with his left hand. We'll be coyotes tomorrow evening in your honor. So we're all going to be wearing these? Aye, just different colors for each of us. I thought using our regular mask would be a little risky in this case. But I don't want us to look too similar either. If we all wore the same outfit and one of us got caught, we'd be done for in no time. Wearing the same mask is a good middle ground, I'd say. We'll be able to spot each other easily, whilst the other guests or guards would have a much harder time. Having donned the new vest, hose, and boots, Cedric wrapped his shirt around his torso. Does everything fit? Perfectly. Oh, actually, I think the sleeves might just be a tad too long. Let me have a look. Ridley picked up a pencil and a tape paper, resting it on top of the coyote's arm. I really got lucky running into a gang of bandits named the Masquerade, didn't I? Whatever do you mean? You could have just been any old rogues, but you lads went the extra mile. The sun bear gave a little amused snort as he made a mark on the tape, indicating how much fabric he would have to cut. There's just some fun about dressing up, don't you think? Putting on a performance, as Dion always says. It's something that I've always enjoyed. I remember my first time at a masked ball, back when I worked at Old Wesley's as his assistant tailor. I was always on the lookout for leftover fabrics, which I used to make my own outfits and costumes. The result was nothing too elaborate, but fucking hell, I felt like I could conquer the world once I saw it all coming together. There we go. Come back to me later and I'll have made up all the adjustments. Now please, have a look at it yourself. The coyote picked up the mask and hat after sliding on his gloves and stepping closer to the mirror. Ridley kept his eyes on him, waiting for a comment at the end result. Bloody hell. I don't think that I've ever worn something as good-looking as this at a party. It makes me want to change the way that I walk and move around to match its elegance. Nonsense. You match it already. Picturing walking around grand hallways filled with beautifully dressed guests brought Cedric's mind back to Ridley's tale from just a few minutes earlier. How did the ball of yours end up going? The bear smiled, though not without a hint of sadness. I met my first crush there. So, as well as it could, I'd say. One of these days, I'll tell you all about her. Seeming to suddenly snap out of his thoughts, he gestured at Cedric to turn around. Let me get a full view of you, boy. The coyote did as he was told, adding a touch of flamboyance by spinning around quickly, causing the tassels on his sleeves to flap in the air behind him. Ridley simply nodded, satisfied with his work. I look amazing. Stunning work as always, Rid. Naturally. When have I ever disappointed you? Oh, I forgot. Vic said that I'm not supposed to compliment you too much. Rumor has it that your ego's big enough that your ticks are bursting with confidence before they are with blood. You absolute bitch. Get that boyfriend of yours in here so that I can give him a proper slap. From the moment that Cedric set foot outside of Ridley's tent, the day seemed to have been severely slowed down to the point that it almost was a relief when dinner time rolled around. Selwyn had volunteered to serve as the evening cook and had prepared a light and very tasty barley soup. After the generous portions of meat and vegetables Cedric and Hollis had served the group for lunch, this was just what they needed. Once the house cat was done cleaning the dishes, Cedric noticed him wandering back to his tent and decided to follow. It had been more than a couple of days since the two had shared a long chat together. Hey, Sel. Mind if I join you for a while? Selwyn jumped at the sound of an unexpected voice. Oh, Cedric, it's you. After spending so much time together, the coyote knew how easily startled the cat could be. He prevented this. He'd tried coughing as he neared the tent to make the presence known, but this had been to no avail. It was such a common occurrence that he didn't even feel the need to apologize for having scared him, as he previously would have. You know, you remind me of old Emma, one of the serving maids working at my parents' estate. Selwyn replied with a grin. I know I'm an old woman in spirit, no need to rub it in. No, it's because V and I used to startle her so, even when it wasn't our intention. Once we rushed in to tell her that my father had just acquired a painting of the Grand Canal, she always used to tell us about how much she would have loved to have visited Venice, you see. My goodness, she almost hit the ceiling with how high she leapt in fright. I feel like I get along nicely with her. Yes, you most certainly would have. Have you any plans for the evening, by the way? I'm not really in the mood for tying you up, if that's what you mean. I just wanted to chat. Oh, well in that case, please make yourself comfortable. And be prepared for a series of lengthy tangents. Selwyn pushed his desk chair in Cedric's direction and sat himself down on the bed. Have you sketched anything new lately? No, not really. I've actually been juggling some writing ideas. Goodness knows how they'll turn out. You mean proper writing? Aye, Dion lent me this book, you see. Cedric chuckled, crossing his legs and leaning in to listen. That's a fairly common occurrence. Not if you are Blake or Hollis is not. That's just because they can't read. Anyways, it was about the forbidden love between a noble woman and a humble servant working at her estate. Sounds a little bit like you and Victor when I put it that way. Was it any good? Not really. I lost interest very quickly, but it got me thinking about what I could change to make the story work, and that morphed into a series of other ideas. It's fun getting lost in an imaginary world though, creating characters, environments, mythical creatures. I'm not going to end up writing anything, most likely. There is a reason drawing is my main skill. I'm just not very good at much else. You need to stop putting yourself down before you even try something. Who knows, with a little bit of practice you could become really good at it. Selwyn's face grew hot at the coyote's compliment. You put a lot of faith in me. Was the story ending happy or tragic? In the original book, I mean. I didn't get that far, but I'm assuming the latter since it was a recommendation from Dion. Cedric gave a slightly disappointed snort. It helps to get the point across, I suppose. That's probably the reason that he didn't tell you about it. He might have thought that it would hit too close to home with the love between social classes theme. Hey, I'm not that sensitive. It's just, right now I would prefer a deep and interesting novel that also gives me a little hope for the future. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. I understand. The house cat was smiling as he flipped through his sketchbook. Your playing earlier was really good, by the way. If you thought that was good, you should have heard me a few years ago when I still knew what I was doing. Were you taught as a child? No, my father wanted me to take up manly activities, like hunting or fencing. I was lucky that he never made a fuss about all the hours that I spent drawing, but I think music would have been a step too far. Once I was an adult, I put my free time to good use and took up the lute and harpsichord, and the fortepiano, keyboards in general. It was challenging, but I had a great teacher, and I was told that I had a good sense of musicality, so time flew during each lesson. What about you? Can you play any instrument? No, sadly not. What sort of music do you like then? I'm not sure. Anything really. Cedric replied with a smirk. Oh really? I know what people actually mean when they say they listen to anything or everything. Selwyn kept up the banter, placing a hand on each hip. Alright, try me. Jigs. A lot of fun. Morris tunes. I like them musically, though I feel like you need to be drunk to understand Morris dancing. Fair enough. Ballads? Can be a little depressing, but that's always down to the words. Country dance tunes? Love 'em. A short silence followed. As soon as it seemed like Cedric was about to give up, the questions resumed at an even faster pace. But it was useless. String quartets, keyboard music, church music, orchestral music, each of these was met with that same polite little nod. Fucking hell, you would... Cedric caught himself before completing the sentence. This had to be it. Oh, I have it. You know those soloists that play complex music for the sake of virtuosity? It's all the rage lately. Audiences go absolutely wild for them. It was obvious that the coyote had finally found Selwyn's weak spot. The cat squirmed, trying his best to remain objective. There's still some good in... at least... Fine, you got me. I cannot stand those concerts. 2 hours of noise. A poor instrument getting tortured to satisfy the public's perverted need for something that looks impressive. Selwyn was beginning to gesticulate more and more with each word that he spoke, his voice getting louder and his tone getting angrier, albeit in a humorous manner. Said frustration was completely genuine, which only made his rant funnier. Then they'll whip out an old tune someone loves, like Over the Hills and Far Away, and proceed to fucking obliterate it over the course of the following 15 minutes. Cedric was laughing so much that he had almost collapsed onto the ground. The cunts just keep going to, pardon my French. Whenever you think that they've finished the tune off, they bring it back to life only to murder it again. I can't breathe. And everyone just eats it up. They're not listening to music, they're attending a freak show. The coyote slammed his fist onto the desk, finally managing to catch his breath again. Oh, I haven't laughed like this in a long time. Selwyn shook his head. I'm going to fucking murder you, Cedric. The white fabric at his tent's entrance has flung open as Victor suddenly bursts in, having heard the commotion. What the hell is going on here? His gaze settled on Cedric's, who was still recovering from his laughing fit. Now it was Victor's turn to burst into laughter. What did you do to him, Sil? This must have been good. I've never seen Ced in such a state. What do you mean, what did I do? This fiend pulled it out of me. He had to go digging until he found the only type of music that I cannot stand, and would like to see eradicated from this earth. The coyote still was wiping his tears from his eyes. That was just so genuine. Selwyn's rants are phenomenal, to be fair. But alas, I came here to drag a certain boyfriend of mine to bed. Oh, quite right. We'd all best try to get as much sleep so that we can before tomorrow. I won't keep him any longer. Off you go, Ced. The old chair creaked as Cedric slowly stood up again. Thank you, Sel. This was so much fun. Your friendship means the world to me. He pointed to his right index at the cat's hand, blowing him a kiss with the other hand. Never ever change. I don't plan to. Good night. The fact that he was hardly able to get any sleep came as no surprise to Cedric. He'd spent the night tossing and turning in his and Victor's bed. Hopefully he hadn't woken the fox up at any point. As soon as he caught a glimpse of the sunlight, he sprung from his mattress, rinsing his face and threw some clothes on, ready to take a morning walk to calm his nerves. The bandit camp and the forest surrounding it were silent. Instead of finding it as peaceful as he would have any other morning, it felt unnerving. His heartbeat began to increase. The imaginary scenario of a group of guards happening across their tents while they were all asleep formed in his mind and became impossible to ignore. He forcefully shook his head, almost like he was trying to fling that thought out of his brain and onto the frozen ground. Morning, rich kid. The sudden sound of Blake's voice behind him caused Cedric to almost jump out of his skin, much like Selwyn had the evening prior. There was no point in attempting to play it cool. Oh, bloody hell, Blake. Where the fuck did you come from? The Doberman retaliated with a familiar sneer. I'm going for a walk. You joining? Cedric shrugged and followed him without another word, though to his dismay he quickly discovered Blake's fast pace wasn't easy to keep up with. Despite almost being out of breath, the coyote spoke up. He needed to chat with someone to get his feelings off his chest. I wish that I was like you right now. How can you not be nervous about this evening? I'm fucking terrified. We all are. But that's the fun of it, no? It's no riskier than any other job. It's part of the act that Dion's always talking about. Sometimes you're not just lying to your victims, you're lying to yourself, for your own sanity. Cedric nodded. It's hard forcing myself to think that way. You'll learn to after a while. I thought you already had. I thought so too. It's just, this event feels different. You're wasting your time worrying, kid. I think you're one of the more skilled bandits that I've met. Such a statement coming from the Doberman meant a lot, and it filled Cedric with some of the warmth that he'd been missing since he'd gotten out of bed. There was no need to thank his companion. He knew that for Blake, the silence would suffice. Still, he could tell Blake was holding back a retort as to not ruin the moment of generosity. About 20 minutes later, they caught a glimpse of the road to Hildford ahead of them and knew it was time to turn back. But before they could make their way back to the camp, Blake slowed his pace and came to a halt in a small clearing. I'm going to exercise a bit. Feel free to head back by yourself if you like. Actually, mind if I join you? It would do me some good. Following Blake's morning routine was a real challenge, but Cedric was determined to go through with it. He joined on every sit-up, push-up, each leg and chest workout, and even picked up a couple of moderately heavy rocks Blake had found close by months ago and had set aside to use for arm and shoulder exercises. By the end of the last set, he could feel that he pushed himself just the right amount, and most importantly, he finally cleared his mind and felt ready to start the day. Blake gave him a pat on the back. They'd started walking back to the camp at a noticeably slower pace, which Cedric did not mind one bit. What are your plans for the future, if you have any? Damn if I know. Well, it'd be nice knowing what it's like to actually live somewhere instead of always being on the move. My old man would have wanted it for me. Would you see yourself living with Ridley one day? The bandit snorted. That lad deserves better than me, and I'm sure that he has better plans for the future than I do. A short pause followed. I suppose my answer is yes. I wouldn't mind sharing my life with him. Cedric smiled. I hope things work out for all of us. We'll see. Despite the conversation screeching to a halt, Cedric let the silence linger since he knew Blake wasn't one for being too wordy. He'd spoken his mind already. They'd almost reached the camp again when the coyote thought of one more subject that he was curious to discuss with the Doberman. Before I crossed paths with Victor again, I'd never stopped to consider whether I might be attracted to men, but then everything suddenly made sense. I was wondering, did you have a moment of realization when everything clicked? Firstly, I am not a certified poofter like you. Excuse me? What we got up to a few evenings ago begs to differ. I just mean, when I find someone attractive, I don't really stop to consider their gender. It just happens. That's very interesting. I've always thought of it as my own business. Never really bothered to stop and consider what I was, or whether it was considered appropriate or not. That made sense for someone who'd been born into banditry. Cedric wondered if he might have felt the same way had he led a similar life. Upon reaching the camp again, both bandits were greeted by a still drowsy Victor, sizzling half a dozen sausages in one of Hollis' pans. It was still quite early in the morning compared to their usual breakfast time. Clearly Victor hadn't managed to get much sleep either. Anyone else would have found it impossible to spot a hint of restlessness in him, but by now Cedric had learned to recognize the fox's more subtle mannerisms. The sausages smelled and tasted heavenly. He had to refrain from gobbling up his share in seconds. Someone's hungry today. The coyote replied with more than a hint of pride. I joined in on one of Blake's workouts. No wonder then. You're still alive? I went easy on the kid, but if he keeps it up, we can make things progressively more difficult. I wouldn't want to be in your shoes, love. That's because you're a lazy bastard, Vic. Bonjour, mes amis. A slightly grouchy Dion had appeared from his tent and was greeted by the others as he trudged over to join them by the campfire. Hope you all slept well. Now let's get this over and done with. He raised his voice, calling out for the rest of the group. Boys, I need each and every one of you here this instant. We're going over this evening's plans. A muffled reply carried over from one of the tents, followed by complete silence. I said move your fucking arses this instant or I will make you regret it. All right. I was just washing my face for heaven's sake. Don't you forget what happened on May Day last year. I needn't say more. Cedric had no clue what the hyena was referring to, but it seems to do the trick. Each of the others had appeared from their tents in less than a minute. Dion placed the parchment that he'd been carrying down in front of him, fixing it to a large tree stump with a knife. The rest of the bandits who had regrouped around him quickly turned silent. The faint sunlight illuminated a meticulously drawn map of the Hillsford Manor house. This was the original building plan from when it had first been designed, which Hollis and Blake had managed to steal from the town archives a couple of weeks before. I want you all to become very well acquainted with this building's layout. We'll be heading there after 7 o'clock, traveling with Hollis's carriage, which is going to be sitting in the courtyard for the duration of the event. It's safe to assume that we shall be heading straight to the ballroom once we've entered the mansion. That'll be the perfect crowded environment for us to carry out our work whilst going unnoticed. Shall we be splitting up into different groups? Naturally, I don't want us all turning up at the same time either. Each group will arrive within 10 minutes from the others in the very least. What a shame. We would have looked stunning side by side in our outfits. While I appreciate the theatricality of your vision, Ridley, we must sadly favor being practical in these instances. Now, the group formations are as follows. Blake and Ridley shall be the first, Cedric and Victor the second, whilst me, Hollis, and Selwyn shall be arriving last, since we'll have the carriage with us. As for names, after much internal debate, I've settled on Sebastian Alamaya Lancaster IV. Nothing too elaborate. The whole group burst out laughing at Dion's deadpan delivery of the name. What's funny? It's perfect. What's worse is that it's accurate. Dion nodded elegantly in response. Your approval is what I am after, my lad. Selwyn, I'm thinking that you could pose as a cousin of mine, another Lancaster. I'm rubbish at names, so you're free to come up with anything you like. I'll have a think then. Hollis, what about you? Keep in mind that you'll be our humble serving man for the evening. The tiger shook his head dismissively, though he was still clearly mulling things over before giving a definitive answer. Call me anything. Jeeves will do. Not fucking Jeeves. Blake, you're next. But how am I meant to compete with Jeeves? The Doberman sighed before puffing up his chest, putting on his best snooty accent. Call me Richard. Richard Highcourt. Of course you're named yourself Dick. I bet you couldn't beat that bear. Ridley smiled smugly. Hugh Jonas, at your service. Oh, for heaven's sake. Cedric, my lad, please help me bring a pitch of decorum back into this conversation. The coyote covered his mouth with his right hand, trying to think of a reasonably posh name. Rufus Walsingham? Splendid. You never disappoint, lad. And last but not least, Victor. Hector Birdwhistle. Brilliant. Now please make sure that you remember your own name, as well as everyone else's. You never know when it might come in handy. As for what we'll be doing... Hollis, you'll be loitering about near the entrance, keeping an eye on our carriage. Would it hurt if I also picked a pocket or two while I'm there? Guard duty can be tedious. I could steal from some of the other carriages too if I get the chance. As long as you're discreet about it, you could murder someone for all I care. I'll try my best not to. Blake, Ridley, listen closely. All the way upstairs, hidden amongst the lavish private chambers, is a room stacked with the owner's most prized possessions. I want you two to head up there and do some investigating. Depending on what you find, you might be able to make multiple trips back and forth to load up the cart. How do we know that specific room is where you think it is? Dion pointed at the plan in front of him. Says right in here, nicely spelt out. Dion, you know that I can't read for fuck's sake. The hyena grumbled, though an amused smile was clearly visible on his face. Treasury. That's what's written. But for all we know, its contents might have been moved somewhere else. These plans aren't exactly up to date. Very true. What if a servant working at a certain manor house we tipped off confirmed that this is still to be accurate? Would that satisfy you? Ridley tilted his head to one side, looking a little confused at such a specific example. Yes, it certainly would. Hollis placed a hand on the bear's shoulder, giving him a friendly little shake. It was me. I tipped off a servant working there who confirmed the map was still accurate. Oh, well in that case I have no objections. Great work, huh? Let us proceed. Selwyn, I want you to head upstairs too. But instead of focusing on a single room, be exploring the bedchambers, pickpocketing any precious items that happen to catch your eye. I hope my pockets are spacious enough. What if they rip open? I could get us all caught. Ridley smiled. No matter how much they'd known him, Selwyn had always been the same overthinker. All of our costumes have very large pockets. I made sure to place them so that they are both easy to slip things into, but also don't create obvious bulges, as to not give away the trinkets and valuables being stored within. No need to worry. No need to worry? Have you forgotten who you're talking to, Rid? I don't mean to sound alarmist, but... The group burst out laughing. Please don't finish that sentence, Selwyn. As for our lovebirds, I want the both of you wandering the ballroom, having a jolly good time and pickpocketing as you go. A dumb grin appeared on Victor's face. I've seen Cedric pull off the impossible whilst on the job. Isn't that right, my darling? Hollis and Selwyn taught me well, is all. Waving it off was useless. The fox was determined to compliment his partner, whether he liked it or not. Didn't you once accompany a gentleman you'd just stolen from around town? You were on a hunt for his pickpocketer, if I recall correctly. Now that's a fucking power move. I almost shat myself, but that's besides the point. What about you, Dion? What shall you be doing? I will also be downstairs, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious, and acting as a bit of a distraction. I will make sure that each of you can find me, should you need me for whatever reason. I just hope that you're not planning on attempting another comedic routine. We all remember how that last one went." The hyena let out a cavernous sigh. "Oh, alas, my amusing reference to the frogs of Aristophanes fell on deaf ears. I should have thought some Falstaffian quips would have been appreciated at the very least. I doubt that you even know any jokes that belong in our current century." The hyena crossed his arms. "Sometimes I wonder why I even try with you lot." "We love you, Dion." "Ah, yes, it's the sex. That's what it is." The others burst out laughing at the unexpected remark. "Now, does anyone have any questions?" Blake stepped forward, placing his right hand on the map. "Aye. What if Red and I take too long to find the room that we're looking for? Are there any other clues that could help us out?" "Alas, not that I know of." "Perhaps our Cedric could help us with this particular dilemma." The coyote smiled as Dion extended the palm of his right hand in his direction. The thought of being considered the expert at manor houses definitely amused him. "First things first, I told you that I've never visited this particular estate, so take what I say with more than a pinch of salt. That being said, imagine I was a wealthy lord and owned precious crystals, pearls, rubies, paintings worth a fortune, and the like. I'd want to show them off whenever I got the chance to do so. So we're not looking for a secret doorway hidden amongst tall bookshelves, nor shall we expect an elaborate locking system. It'll most likely be a door like any other. Looks like it faces one of the main corridors too." "They're going to have some servants guarding the room, aren't they?" "Aye. They'll definitely have a couple of armed men patrolling the corridors. Nothing that we can't sneak past." "I can also help with distracting the guards. Could pretend that I'm looking for someone that I know or something like that." Ridley gave Selwyn a pat on the back. "Tuck their heads off, Sel. Do what you do best." Though speaking of hidden doorways and secret corridors, it might not be the case for the treasury, but manors such as this one have many passages which are regularly used by the servants. It's a way for them to take more shortcuts, and for the nobles to see the troubling side of the lower class persons less often. In short, it's a win-win situation for both parties. "Quite right, Cedric. Hidden passages could very well save our lives in a dire situation. Be on the lookout for them at all times." A brief silence followed. Dion's gaze settled on each of them until he spoke again. "There's one last point that I have to make. Though we'll all be well prepared as possible, we cannot stand a chance against fate itself. You're all well aware of how plans such as these tend to play out. Something or other will go wrong. There is no preventing it. What we can do, however, is use these tricks of fate as an opportunity to put our improvisational skills to the test." Placing a hand on each hip, he lifted his head and gave a proud nod. "That being said, it appears that we are all set. May fortune smile on us, friends. I'm sure that we'll pull this off splendidly. You may get back to whatever it is that you were doing now." Before Cedric was able to follow Victor back to his tent, the hyena caught up with him and placed a large hand on his shoulder, gently but firmly anchoring him in place. "Cedric, my lad, how are you feeling?" "Oh, I'm alright, I suppose." Dion didn't buy it even for an instant. "What's wrong?" "Alright, fine. I've been anxious since I woke up. I wish that there was some way that I could stop my mind from wandering like this. I wish that there was just an easy answer to not assuming the worst will happen without knowing which worst it could be." Cedric had always looked up to the bandit leader, and even now he secretly hoped Dion might have something to suggest, or that he'd find just the right words to say. "The solution is called gin, and it is strictly off limits until we're done with the job. But you and I could perhaps share a little secret." The hyena readjusted his belt so that Cedric could clearly see a tiny flask that he had been tied to. He loosened the rope around it and uncorked it, taking a sip and then offering it to his companion. "Getting too anxious can lead to committing mistakes that we'd usually find laughable on any other occasion. If this is our only solution, then we must bend the rules a little." Cedric downed some of the drink and felt its warmth slowly spread within. "Thank you, Dion. I really appreciate it. Things will feel just a tad more melancholy without you or Victor around. I know you both have your plans for the future, and I have supported you both since the very first evening that we were introduced. But I would be lying if I didn't say that I can picture a future masquerade with you in our ranks. To say the coyote was caught off guard by Dion's sudden change of topic would have been an understatement. He tried to think of a good response but came up short. There just wasn't enough time for him to consider what the right thing to say was. You still remember hearing about our plans? His reply probably came off as overly defensive, though it wasn't met with any comment. I just didn't expect it. That talk was months ago. Of course I remember. I was impressed at the thought of the both of you wanting to start a new life. And after this heist, you'll most likely have the means to follow through with your plans. Nevertheless, I'd like you to consider the following offer. If you were to stay, I'd let you keep any money that you make from any robberies that you carry out with Victor or by yourself, even if you were to rejoin us in a year or so. Gosh, am I really that good? Not everyone has the aptitude for this job that you've proven to possess. This statement was met with a shrug. It's only impressive you consider my background and how it still defines me. And that's some first-class horseshit, Cedric. The only person here bringing up your past is you. And Blake. But that Tailraiser jokes about everyone that way. I've never made anyone that offer that I just made you. Think about it. Cedric nodded. Dion was right as usual. Part of him didn't like the idea of leaving the bandits that he'd come to call his friends behind. But this wasn't going to be a goodbye. Surely he and Victor would manage to arrange a couple of trips to go pay a visit to the others in the future. No matter how tempting Dion's offer was, he still wanted to follow his initial plan. I will. I promise. Hours later, when each of the bandits had finished their preparations, they regrouped around the campfire. This was it, though it was over. Excitement was coupled with palpable tension in the cold evening air. The flickering flames illuminated each of them, dressed in their new costumes and carrying their masks. They'd certainly have no trouble passing as a traveling theater company, whilst looking like this, Cedric thought to himself. Dion raised his arm, demanding their attention, and gave a few last words of encouragement. By now there was not much left to remind the group of. They were all well aware of what was expected of them, and had firmly etched that old building plan into their minds. Hollis put out the fire, and he and Ridley held up a pair of lanterns as they all began their march. For a moment their surroundings ceased to feel real. The scene looked like it was straight out of a Dutch painting one could observe hanging in the corridors of Cedric's old home. No doubt the effect Ridley had intended. The bear himself was wearing a cream-colored outfit, almost shining in the dim light. Blake looked like he was stepping out of a Shakespearean play, completely covered in red fabric, with a shiny laurel-adorned helmet in his head, and a short cape flapping behind him. Hollis was sporting a tall feathered adorned top hat. His outfit's main color was blue, with some gold touches that gave it an almost moth-like design. He was carrying a simpler mask than the others, more apt for the humble servant role that he'd taken on. Dion's black garments, despite Cedric's predictions, seemed oddly somber. The only elements that stood out from this almost puritanical aesthetic were a red and purple sash wrapped around his right shoulder, and the bright red mask that he was carrying. As for Selwyn, Ridley had meant for him to wear a costume similar to Dion's, but the house cat had ended up completely tearing through it only an hour earlier. After half an hour of general panic, he'd been handed what the Sun Bear had claimed was their only reserve outfit, a bold and voluptuous ball gown with a towering white wig. Much to everyone's amusement, it had turned out to be the perfect fit, though of course walking across a forest with it wasn't the easiest task. The others had joked that he could claim that he was a disheveled ghost of Dion's character's wife upon arrival at the ball, and despite some grumbling, Selwyn had taken to the idea. Lastly, Victor was dressed in a white costume reminiscent of his usual outfit, yet with an added touch of finesse apt for the occasion. A large tricorn hat, and little splashes of pink and black complete the outfit. Everything was beginning to feel magical, the withered leaves carried by the wind, the bony fingers belonging to the branches swaying above them, the faint light illuminating their faces, the shine of the weapons each of them was tucking in between their theatrical costumes. It felt like they'd all been conjured up by an artist's imagination. Cedric was almost afraid to blink, in case this mysterious world around him were to suddenly vanish. Shit. Almost tripping on a rock in front of him was enough to drag him back to reality. Victor gently took hold of his hand. Don't you die on us now, love. They were bound to reach the main path that ran through the forest any moment now. Selwyn was walking to his right, while Hollis was sitting at the front of his old red carriage, holding the reins and checking on the horses. Always wear gloves, no eating in the ballroom or upstairs. God, I hope that I don't forget anything at the last minute. Cedric chuckled. You'll be fine, Sel. Nobles break those rules all the time. Make sure that you don't do anything too noticeable, and you'll be golden. In this outfit, just exert some of that ladylike charm. Or pray someone else makes more of an ass of themselves than you do. Exactly. Asses or not, we'll be considerably richer tomorrow, and that's all that matters. You have any plans for what you'd like to do with the money? You're asking the wrong person if you want an exciting answer. I can already think of a billion practical things that we might need. Oh, come on. What's the point of doing all of this if you can't have some fun afterwards? We should organize a trip somewhere special. Could take the carriage up north to see the Lake District for a few days. I've always wanted to. That's a lovely idea, Sel. Hollis grumbled. Don't know how doable it is. That depends on how much money we make. If it's more than enough, we should put it in to vote. Come on, Hollis, why not? I didn't say no, did I? I just don't want to see our savings vanish up in a matter of days. The conversation was cut short the moment that they reached the path. Each bandit covered their face with their mask and fixed it in place under their hats. They were no longer their usual selves. From this moment on, they were nameless, ghostly figures shrouded in mystery. Dion cleared his throat. According to the plan, now is the time that we split up and head into town. Blake, Ridley, you go first. Cedric and Victor will follow in 10 minutes or so, whilst Hollis, Selwyn, and I will stick together and get there last. We'll all meet at the camp again later. Remember to whistle our signal just before we get back so that we know who's approaching. Yes, sir. Blake took off his helmet and performed a bow in his dark red outfit. See you later, you bunch of tail raisers. Dion rolled his eyes while Cedric and Victor automatically responded with an up yours. Selwyn, you ought to bind and gag that dog more often. It would certainly be to everyone's benefit. The Doberman spoke again, probably replying with another insult, but he was already too far off for the others to make out any of his words. In less than a minute, Ridley and Blake's silhouette had been swallowed by the forest's long evening shadows. Perhaps tying him upside down from a tree would do the trick? That sounds ideal. Hogwash, who do you think you're lying to? You love Blake and Ridley just as much as any of us. All the more reason for me to expect better behavior. They're just lucky that they happen to be extremely skilled at what they do. A few achingly long minutes later, Victor gently took hold of his lover's gloved hand. All right, my dear, where next? Are you ready? Cedric nodded without uttering a word, worried that it might somehow betray his restlessness. Dion replied with a wink from behind his mask. Break a leg, boys. Go do what you do best. The moment that the others had faded into the distance, Cedric noticed how silent and void of life the forest surrounding him and Victor had grown. He really missed those long summer days, when cheerful bird songs would be echoing all around them. He spent most of the walk looking down at the path directly ahead of him, to avoid stepping in mud if he could help it. The joys of being overdressed for a social event, he thought to himself. Supposing everything goes well. You'd be able to pay off your debt with Dion. I certainly would. It would feel like a great burden finally off my back. And what would happen after that? Cedric was half expecting some new expected issue that he'd never given any consideration to brought up in response, but this was not the case. Victor replied in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. You and I would pack up our belongings, say our goodbyes, and begin the next leg of our journey. I'm not gonna lie, I'm very excited. Aren't you, pretty boy? The fox's smile was clearly audible from beneath his mask. He meant every word. There's no other reason Dion might want to keep you around. Dion is a man of honor. There are no hidden clauses in his contracts. Free to go means free to go. Why do you ask? Has he told you something? He made me a good offer in case I wanted to remain a member of the masquerade, or even rejoin in a year or so. Victor clearly wasn't expecting this. And what did you say? That I'd consider it. Despite trying to conceal his anxiety, his hands were fidgeting nervously. Look, Cedric, I'd have nothing against you if you chose to stay. The coyote shook his head. I don't want to stay. I want to follow you. I want us to build a life together. Cedric replied with a quiet nod. I'd love that more than anything in the world. His words were tender and almost naked in their honesty. There was no doubt in his mind. Their thoughts hadn't changed since that evening that they spent on the rooftops near Victor's old hideout. The closer that they got to Castle Hillsford, the more distant sounds began to grow audible, sounds of the crowded streets and of carriages and people hurriedly coming and going from the town's gate. That manor house really chose to be on the other side of the town just to spite us, didn't it? All the better for us to take a pleasant stroll through the center and observe the passers-bys, my dear. I've never been to one of these events. It'd be fun to do some people watching and see how everyone has dressed up for the occasion. I've been to so many of these, and yet to think that this is the first masquerade ball that we'll be attending together. It's quite amusing. A tiny white object caught Cedric's eye as it glinted towards the cold ground. V, it's snowing. It's actually snowing. The fox's head shot up as he glanced at their surroundings. Sure enough, countless other snowflakes were suspended in midair, floating downwards. My goodness, you're right. How absolutely enchanting. Victor sneered, replying with a playful jab. Oh ho, listen to you. Just like that, you've reverted from rogue to aristocrat in a matter of seconds. We need to get into character, you ruffian. Go on, try it. After a brief silence, Victor replied, putting on his best upper-class accent. I positively adore the snowy weather, old chap. Cedric burst out laughing. You'll be invited out to tea in no time, mark my words. The old trees surrounding them grew more scarce and were replaced by rolling fields as a town gate came into view half a mile ahead of them. A solitary guard was standing at the entrance and seemed to be minding his own business. His presence was enough to put the coyote slightly on edge at first, though there really wasn't much to be done on an evening like this other than making sure fights didn't break out on the street once folks had had too much to drink. There was no risk of getting stopped. Just as expected, the two lovers walked straight past the guard, who let out a deafening yawn without even attempting to cover his mouth. The town center was as grand as ever, the rows of lit windows lending it a warmth that it seemed to lack during the day. In the middle of the busy main square, a band of musicians had picked up their instruments and had begun playing a set of jigs while a small crowd of dancers and spectators gathered around them. It wasn't just the wealthy who were enjoying a good time that evening, judging by how full all the local taverns were. To nobody's surprise, a number of masked figures could be seen mingling among the crowd, most of them probably headed to the old manor house just like Cedric and Victor. The fox was really getting into it, excitedly pointing out the costumes that caught his eye. There were no lack of creativity to be found with the designs. Cedric spotted a Robin Hood with a quiver and a bow hung on his back, a rustic green man covered in leaves and moss from head to toe, and a couple of Commedia dell'arte characters just a few feet behind them. A group of badgers close by were dressed as Turks, the men sporting huge turbans whilst the women were covered with thin veils. Despite their efforts, it was abundantly clear none of them had set a single foot on Turkish soil in their lives. Some of these are absolutely ridiculous. That's the fun of it. Behind them, an unmasked fox gentleman was strolling at a leisurely pace with a walking stick in hand. He struck the coyote as quite handsome. In fact, he almost looked like Victor. Maybe you'll just have a thing for foxes, Cedric. He most certainly had a thing for foxes. Upon closer inspection, however, his vulpinous appearance turned out to be an actual disguise. Their real species and even their gender had been cleverly concealed. Possibly the most impressive costume that he had seen so far. The less adventurous of those with less money to spend on elaborate outfits could be seen wearing a simple black domino over their heads and shoulders, paired with plain white masks. Nothing special, but it did the trick. The coyote had worn something similar to a couple of occasions when he hadn't been given enough time to prepare for a ball. Next, Cedric's gaze settled on a shadowy, mysterious-looking figure. They were wearing an elaborate costume with a long, bird-like mask that reminded him of the one Victor would always use. The coyote pointed them out to his partner. "That one's you if you had no budget limit for the regular bandit attire." Victor smiled. "What can I say? They have good taste." A silk purse tied to one of the figure's leather belts caught the coyote's eye. "And good money by the look of it." With a gust of wind, the snow grew heavier. Luckily for both the bandits and the other attendees, the manor house had just come into view, which meant that their clothes wouldn't be too damp by the time that they reached the entrance. They walked past a series of huge urns, flaking either side of the path. It felt like they were teetering on the threshold of dangerous, unexplored land. Surroundings that would have been once part of Cedric's everyday life now glared at him maliciously. He'd become an intruder of lower status than any of the servants employed by the estate's owner. Both bandits got their first proper look at the building that they've heard so much about over the past few months. Though they knew exactly what to expect from the plans Dion had shown them, it was still a tad disappointing after so much buildup. At first glance, it actually reminded him of his old home, albeit at least 5 times its size. The closer that he got, the more details emerged from the darkness. Rows of large windows, tall chimneys, and subtle Baroque ornaments burst out from the red brick walls. The main entrance was most impressive part of the whole building. The bricks of the facade had been covered by towering stone pilasters, harkening back to the temples of ancient Greece, lending its grandiose look. A row of statues silently observed the couple as they reached the steps leading up the front door, which had been left wide open, with a servant standing on each side to welcome the attendees and point them in the right direction. Music and laughter could already be heard coming from the bright and crowded halls within. The guard at the right greeted them with a polite little bow. "Good evening, dear guests. You'll find the ballroom to the left of the main hall, whilst the dining room is to the right. In case you want to take off any articles of clothing, the tiny door next to the dining room entrance leads to the cloakroom." Cedric thanked the servant with a nod. Victor leaned towards the coyote to whisper in his ear. He was almost giddy with excitement. "Are you scared, Cedric?" Yes. Yes, I am." The fox let out a chuckle. Let's rob these bastards blind." To be continued. An autosave has been created for you. Okay, this is the same outro. So, they're finally here, and I'm wondering if any of the people that they were talking about when they were going up to the manor, meaning any of the people that were in the costumes, were Lysander. And I'm wondering if it was specifically the one that looked to resemble Victor's mask, because I kind of feel like Lysander would be that type of person that would want to copy the competition in order to try to get the attention of the person whose attention he's trying to get, which would be Cedric. Unless he has his own like little special mask. It would also be very interesting if it was actually the person that was dressed as a fox, because again, he kind of gives the appearance of a person who would again just copy the competition. The competition being Victor. Anyway, so yeah. What else? It was kind of cool looking at their costumes, like that one CG where you see them all walking. And I admittedly had looked at the sprites beforehand, and I had seen that Selwyn was going to dress as a lady. So earlier on, when um when they're showing off the costumes, that nobody like made a comment about Selwyn dressing as a lady. I was like, oh well, I guess it's gonna be like normal for them to dress like that. I guess. Um, but yeah, like it's kind of cool how they're all coordinated as like coyotes with the masks. Well, I mean, except for Hollis, who doesn't get to have a more ornate mask because he's the help. Anyways, but yeah, so what else? What else? Obviously, something bad is gonna happen. And I do have a theory as to what's gonna happen. That again has to do with specifically Lysander showing up and then ruining everyone's plans. And I have the feeling that he's either gonna show up to kidnap Cedric or to arrest Vincent, or I mean Victor, uh, and then be like, Cedric, if you don't come back with me, then I'll have him basically arrested and killed right in front of you too. So I'm giving you the chance to come back with me and then, be mine, or, you both of you die. Or something like that. Like he's that kind of petty. He's kind of like he cannot fathom a world in which Cedric decided to pick this bandit, this lowlife, this person that is, according to him, beneath him, over Lysander, who has quote unquote status, but is kind of abusive and, kind of like a self hating homosexual. Um, it's like, yeah, that's like his ego cannot handle this. That's why he's doing all of this to begin with. While Cedric is living, his best life with Victor and the group, Lysander is right there just stewing and just ah. He's like Lex Luthor in the new Superman movie. He's just a hater for Victor. And he would do anything just to ruin it and then prove to everyone that he is the better person for Cedric. But it's like, dude, just this is clearly proof that you are not. Anyways, so yeah. What are your thoughts? What are your comments? Write it down in the comment section. And thank you all for watching / listening. If you would like to play A Fall from Grace yourself or stay up to date with, stuff that's happening with it, you can do so by going down into the link in the description, which should have a direct link for the itch.io page if it still exists. Because they decided to wipe out, they decided to de-index a whole bunch of visual novels. And I have thoughts on that. Like on the one hand, like, oh, Visa and MasterCard are like, pressuring you to do these things. But on the other hand, like you could just say like, fuck you and not do it. And then now you're going like, oh, we're trying to find, new payment processors, so that we don't have to rely on these people. But at the same time, it's like you're still in the wrong. And not only that, but you updated your terms of service, which unfortunately may be used to justify removing furry visual novels and things like that. So like, still fuck you. You're still in the wrong here. You're not the good guy. You're not the poor little guy either. Anyways, but yeah, so if it's still there, the link will still link you there. And they do have a Patreon in case you want to support them. I'm not sure if it supports both of these two or they have their own thing. I'm wondering if One Last Night has decided to update. I know they were working on it, but I don't know if they've released an update for it yet. I'd have to check. I know some of the visual novels that I was following. Sometimes I wouldn't get the little notification saying like, "Oh, there's a new build for it." So I'll have to go check for that one. 'Cause that's one of the ones that I was hoping would update soon. And yay, um, Eden's Reach updated finally. Look forward to that more. Yay. Anyways, but yeah, so all those links down in the description. as well as, you know, a link to become a channel member in case you want to support the channel. It does help support the channel. It does help support me. So yeah, you know, do that. Become a channel member. You get earlier access to these videos as they're being scheduled. If you can't do that, you could support through Ko-fi, either one time, monthly, whatever. Or, you know, Throne in case you feel generous. I do have stuff there. Maybe I should put cooking stuff on there since I'm apparently doing cooking videos for channel members only. Anyway, so yeah. I guess that's it for now, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.